Level 2 is so straightforward, it's almost in the shape of the tree graph that I would have made. There are 18 rooms just like in the first dungeon, but there are far more optional rooms, about 8 maximum compared to the 2 in the first level. There are more branches to the path, however it's typically to only one other room, so it's not difficult on your memory. There aren't multiple levels of nodes and links you have to keep track of. There are 4 keys and 3 locked doors, none of which are required. And yes, you heard that right, there are more keys than there are doors to use them on, so you can leave with a surplus of keys, and not from using shortcuts either, but just by playing the level normally. You can say that one of the locked doors is semi-mandatory if the player needs the old man to learn how to defeat Django. If you were to draw out the main path, it would look like this if you included the detour to the old man, and it would look like this without it. Most of the optional rooms are laid alongside this spine of the dungeon, and you can also bomb your way up through each room here. Much like the first dungeon, the level can be played in a way such that all the keys can be obtained before every locked door that needs them. And since they are all optional, that means there are only 2 rooms besides a boss room where you have to kill everything, and they're both at the very end. Or 3 if you need the old man. The dungeon is designed so that you will go through at least 2 rooms with the new rope enemy at the beginning. What makes ropes different from other walking type enemies is they will dash at the player if they're in their line of sight, and they won't stop until they collide with the terrain. With that kind of behavior, the layouts of the room play a significant role in variation, even if there are similar numbers. Which is why it's so odd that there are 2 rooms both near the start that are mostly the same. They even have the same reward. The only difference is 1 rope. This is some weak variation in the level design here. Instead of shutters being used to trap the player or only open by pushing a block, the room to the north of the start here features shutters used for an optional room where you can still back out or move along. It's to more uniquely carve out the space that you're navigating. The next room is noteworthy for its arrangement of blocks into a maze-like layout, making distinct lanes that the ropes will dash through. So you have strong contrast with ropes being introduced in an open environment and then a highly constricted one. From here is where you have your first optional locked door. Next you have a room with 5 red Garayas. This layout of the room highlights more so than the previous dungeon how their boomerangs go through blocks. Before I keep going on the main path, let's talk about these 2 rooms with the gels. So the gel rooms serve as a moment of reprieve from the rope rooms. Both are in unique variations from the prior level. Both dungeon map and the compass are out in the open but behind locked doors. The compass will show the Triforce room being mostly to the north. Once you get the dungeon map though, you can see how simple the level is and a clear idea how to navigate the rest of it. Remember, prior to this point you have no idea what the shape of the dungeon is, which is why the keys and locked doors to hide it help with making the experience non-linear. Depending on how you move through the dungeon, then dungeon map may be something you had to double back to get. Next is this room with 5 ropes and these 4 blocks. Now this is very similar to the room from earlier in the dungeon, and you have to kill them all to get the key. The most unique aspect to this room is its use of shutters to prevent you from backing out of the room, although you can still ignore the challenge unlike the first level. This could be the point where you get your second key to access the room with the dungeon map if you still remember where the locked door is. Next is this optional room, which is one of the hardest rooms in the game. And unfortunately, it's also kind of bullshit. You have to contend with the unfair design of the Garaya, the fact that it's the harder blue variant, the 4 turrets in the corners of the room, and the fact that this is only the 2nd level, so you only have so many hearts, you likely won't have the magical shield or the blue ring that reduces all damage by half. For a reminder on what I mean by the unfair design of the Garaya, it's the fact that they don't pause before they throw their projectile. What that means is that when you're fighting multiple at once, at any moment in any of the 4 directions they face, they can throw a fast projectile that if you're even 3 tiles away from, you won't be able to react to it. Just trying to move past them within this range is a gamble. Take a look at this here where within the few frames it takes Link to stab the Garaya, he throws his boomerang at me and we trade hits. This is why not having that pause is bad design, because any damage that the player takes isn't due to skill, but randomness. Now this room is a sign of the later challenges to come and how Zelda makes its hardest rooms. Unfortunately, this is also one of the worst designed rooms in the game. In the next room you have a new enemy, which is Moldor. It's a long, slow-moving enemy that can move in 8 directions, unlike the other walking type enemies. Unlike other enemies, Moldworms experience no knockback whatsoever. So while Moldworm may be slow, you have to pay attention so they don't move into you while you're trying to attack them. You can ignore it entirely and go to either of the 2 rooms. If you kill it, you get a key. Next is this room layering spike traps with the keys, which is a new development. The bombs are out in the open, so you can run in, grab them, and get out. Next we have another room with ropes, and this one is mandatory for the shutters ahead. You can still escape from the way you came, and this is the most intense setup with ropes yet. To the side is the semi-mandatory room with the gels. This room is locked off, so you need one of the 4 keys prior to this point, each of which involve killing everything in the room. If you kill all the gels, you're rewarded with rupees. You could still ignore them and just go straight to the old man though. This is possibly the easiest arrangement of gels yet. Now earlier I mentioned how this dungeon had a sort of spine and that you can use bombs to travel through this entire column of rooms and between the old man with the room right before the boss. The dungeon map doesn't show these shortcuts, so the dungeon is more connected than the map conveys. Now we come to the last room before the boss. There's 5 red Gorayas in a sort of Pac-Man-esque maze, and the shutters trap you in from both sides, so there's no escape. The bomb that's rewarded to you from killing all the Gorayas prepares you for the fight ahead. So even if you miss the bombs in the optional room with the keys and spy traps, or if you use them all, the level is designed so that you get them right before you see Dodongo. If the player was to get to Dodongo before seeing the old man, the level is designed so they don't have to travel far to get the hint that Dodongo dislikes smoke. Same with Aquamentus in level 1, you're not locked in with the boss. While you can kill the boss by putting 2 bombs in its mouth, you have to contend with its random movement. Thankfully, the second method allows you to simply stab Dodongo once he's stunned by the smoke, which is much easier. So as it turns out, when I went to do the recording for this video, it was actually much harder to stun Dodongo with the smoke of the bomb than to just put it in his mouth, so disregard what I just said earlier. Looking at the level elements, there's a greater use of shutters in this one. From blocking off optional areas, to blocking off ones on the main path, to shutting you off from behind, to trapping you altogether. Another development is that locked doors are not always part of the main path. If we look at item placement, the dungeon map and compass are both out in the open and both behind optional locked doors. This level establishes that you won't always get the map from being on the main path. Besides the usual enemy progression on a room-to-room basis, the idea has now been set up where bosses will take more than just hitting them with your sword. This level had the additional challenge of a boss that requires an item in order to defeat it, so it had to be designed around that as well. Bombs are deliberately placed so you obtain them right before the boss. Even if the player was to encounter Dodongo before the old man, because of how the 2 rooms before require you to kill all the enemies, there's a lower chance of the player using up all their bombs because the only room they have left before the old man is an easy one with gels. The old man room is positioned close to the end, so it's easy on your memory. In addition to the careful positioning of the old man room is the development to how they don't just provide useful tips, but vital information necessary for winning the game. These are not rooms you want to miss, and every level has one. This level is an outlier though in how there's no dungeon treasure, and by that I mean the part where you go into a sort of side-scroller section underground. Despite all that, this level is not as airtight as level 1. One of the ways I analyze levels is also by looking what would happen if you switched around the contents of the rooms. I could switch out the rupee reward for bombs, and it may even make more sense, because right as you pick up the bombs and encounter the hint with the old man, you can more easily put 2 and 2 together. There's less risk of the player of running out of bombs before they reach Dodongo. I could destroy the key in this southernmost room here outright, and make the reward rupees instead. And it may even be more interesting with these changes, as for one, it would actually match the number of keys to doors, and it would provide a moment where you see a lock before the key. The most questionable aspect of this level is enemy variation. There's only 1 enemy type per room, we're still not at the point where they mix and match enemies. Now take a look at these totals. Stalfos and Wallmasters are nowhere to be seen. In fact, both of those enemies are so rare you won't see either again until level 7. So the iteration of gameplay ideas for both of those enemy types were dropped, while ropes dominate the dungeon and occupy 6 rooms, 2 of which are nearly the same. Analyzing this level took me longer than expected because it was so easy to write it off since the main path is almost a straight line. However, this is why it's important to count things. Consider where and what part of the dungeon items are at, and what the player knows at the time. The main path may be a straight line, but that doesn't mean the player will move through it like one. So while this may not be the most standout Zelda dungeon, it was still noteworthy how the level design is being developed.